If you're out in the ocean, sooner or later Mother Nature is going to get you. Learn about the men who teach heavy weather sailing and how to survive it next.
This is Captain's Log with your host, Captain Mark Gray. Welcome aboard.
My guest is Mike Peisel. He's a very experienced sailor and educator. Please welcome Mike Peisel. It's nice to have you aboard.
Thank you.
Could you give us a history of your boating experience?
My boating experience is long and varied as I see it. Starting sailing at the age of 11 on my father's sailboat, he showed me a few basic points on sailing, and they've stayed with me for a long period of time. Then my parents enlisted me in a racing sailing program for kids, and I learned to hate sailing at that point. Because it was so competitive, so extremely competitive.
I'm that way. I prefer cruising and relaxation versus the hustle and bustle of racing and breaking mast and falling overboard.
Yeah.
Although racing is a major part of boating.
True. I have raced, but what I always wanted to do as a kid is to spend time cruising on a boat, and even at the age of 12 or 13, wanted to spend the night on a sailboat at some strange anchorage. And
yeah. You know, I fell, not to interrupt you too much, but that's how I fell in love with boating. Is I spent a weekend on an Islander 21 where a friend of mine asked me to go down and varnish it and stuff, and I basically watched him. But the guy loaned us the boat for a weekend, and we got in scuba gear and scrubbed the bottom, and that was the best night's sleep I'd had in years. And that actually got me into boating, so I do know that dream. It's kind of a Tom Sawyer-ish type dream, I think, that young people and people just coming into boating, you know, really get into.
Yeah, it really is. Since then, I've taken up sailing, especially since moving to the Santa Barbara area about 15 years ago, and done an awful lot of cruising out to the islands, Santa Cruz, Santa Rosa, San Miguel Island, and done a couple of Hawaii trips in the boat that I presently have. And then last year I took 3 students. These were people who had at the least 4 days sailing experience, and one person had several months sailing experience. Took these 3 students on a trans-ocean sailing instruction trip from England to Florida. And in this 2-month period of time, you might say they got a PhD in sailing. They learned an awful lot.
How much heavy weather did you run into, if any?
In the Atlantic Ocean, not nearly as much as we've had in Santa Barbara Channel.
Just in this little channel area?
Yeah, this is one of the roughest areas around, the Santa Barbara Channel and just outside of the islands. So it's a worldwide known heavy weather sailing area.
Right, and of course we can't stress heavily enough, it's the weather patterns that exist around here that cause that to be in currents and what have you, right? Would you say?
Yeah, it's a unique little weather area. It has its own microcosm of weather, which is different from what we get further down in Southern California or up in the Bay Area or Northern California. We're kind of around the corner from Point Conception, and sometimes that Northern California weather slips into our area and we get nailed. Other times it's just good old warm, comfortable Southern California weather with light winds.
Well, I'd like to say we are doing a show with a meteorologist, an entire show emphasizing especially Channel Islands weather, but national weather, you know, different phenomenon. Could you tell us about the rest of your boating experience? And I know in brief it's quite a detailed thing, but that's okay.
Okay, the rest of the boating experience, you might include the Coast Guard. I was in the Coast Guard for 3 years, rescuing people in, of all places, the Caribbean, which was a great place to be on duty. Our beat was Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and the other islands further south, so that was a nice area to be in. But most of the sailing experience has been in this area, some European sailing, the Mediterranean, the west coast of Europe, and part of the Caribbean.
So let's suffice to say you've spent your life on the water.
I've been around boats a bit, yeah.
And getting to the private education that you do, and I understand you don't really want to teach beginners. You'll take a beginner and teach them heavy weather sailing, but I mean the basics of boating, is that correct?
Yeah, we do is take people who have some sailing experience,
Given 4 days.
and they've had several days or some sailing experience, basic sailing experience time or whatever, and they are planning to do some sort of sailing. They want to cruise to the islands off of Santa Barbara, or take a long trip to Hawaii or something of that sort. And we'll take them out for a 4-day period of time. When we leave the harbor, go out for 4 days, spend that whole time either doing sailing in heavy weather.
What size boat do you use on that?
Use a 30-foot cow. The boat I've had for 14 years now, and it's proven to be a wonderful boat for it. It's
For
large
training,
enough to be
you know.
very, very secure, but small enough to be very manageable. And again, this boat's been to Hawaii and back, so it's totally outfitted with all the heavy weather sails and oversized anchor gear and that sort of thing. So we'll spend the time out at the islands, anchored, using our own anchors at the various harbors, staying overnight, and the next day, if there's an awful lot of wind, we'll go out in that sort of thing. And
Or most people try to stay in. You'll take them out because you have the experience and you know your boat is in tip-top shape, which makes a difference.
Yeah, it's in I like to say perfect shape, but let's call it excellent shape. So we'll take them out. We'll go out and just experience the stronger winds. I mean, not risking people's lives or anything of that sort, but just getting into the kind of thing that they would never normally go out in. And now, once they've done it, then the next time they're caught in it, they know, they can get through. They know what's going on. They know what they're going to feel like. They're going to know that, yes, they can be a little bit afraid, but it's going to be okay. They know what to do with the boat in terms of reefing the sails, head sail changing, and that sort of thing. And in fact, even knowing when to decide not to go out. In other words, chickening out is a legitimate act of seamanship. Or changing your destination instead of going to point A, if going to point B, another harbor is downwind, makes the ride a lot easier and therefore safer. We do that too.
I think a lot of us have done that. There are those people, and I hope they're few, but I know they're out there, that get their friends on board and they want to hit the wind as hard as they can and with as much sail up as possible and get everybody seasick, I think. I'm not sure. But myself, I turn off the wind, I spill wind, and go for the comfortable ride. Whereas if I change my angle a little bit in my sails, it's a horrible ride. It's like a bronking bull. So that is important.
Yeah, well, one of the things we teach them is reefing. And I find that people, when they come out on our trips, the two things that is most scary for them, and these are people with a lot of sailing experience, most of them, is reefing, being caught in heavy weather, and then anchoring. They're terrified.
On that note, we're going to have to stop for a quick break, and we'll be right back. It's been said there are bold sailors and old sailors, but there are no bold old sailors. And I would guess that you're beyond the age of 16, you're still here, and you put in quite a bit of time on the water. So could I get you to tell us a little more about the heavy weather sailing that you teach?
Okay. When people come out on one of these 3 or 4 day trips, the two things they're most concerned with, number one is heavy weather sailing, the other is anchoring. Usually they've had some sort of a heavy weather sailing experience in the past. They got caught out on the way to Catalina or to some brief trip like that. And they were terrified, and the people on their boat figured that they knew what was going on. So it was a scary experience. They were responsible. They felt the weight of responsibility very heavily and realized, hey, I really don't know that much about it. So they'll go out on one of our boats and do a trip out to the islands, during which we are basically guaranteed to hit some heavy weather at the Channel Islands here. And during this period of time, instead of they'll get into doing the reefing, actually reefing the sails, shortening the sails down when the wind gets too strong. And how do you know when to do this? The boat is heeling over so much, and now your anxiety level comes up, and the person starts feeling very, very concerned and realizes that the wind is taking over the boat.
And if you have to go up on deck and pull that sail down, and you have someone that doesn't know anything about boating, steering, that scares you.
Okay, you can. Once you do get up and start pulling the sail down, shortening the sail down, and I show them how to do it, and then they do it. The boat now sits upright, picks up speed, it's under much better control, and they realize, hey, I just went through reefing, I just did it, and we didn't drown, we didn't get hurt, and in fact we're feeling better. The anxiety level immediately drops.
I'm a coward, Mike. What I do is I'll turn up into the wind, take the pressure off the sail and pull it down before I have to. I don't wait until the point, it's maxed out beyond that point. I always try to keep a little less sail up than I need and make a comfortable ride. But also, I'm such a chicken that I'll start the engine and have someone motor into the wind to make sure that the wind doesn't catch the sails while I'm up there, catch it at the wrong time. But,
well, motoring into the wind, suppose you get into a situation sometime where your motor's not working, and this is the kind of stuff we teach people, how to anchor without the motor, how to deal with heavy weather and no motor. If you are motoring into the wind, you have a short period of time that you can do the reefing. The relative wind speed picks up tremendously, and in fact all of this flapping and luffing of the sails introduces again a sort of panic mode. And a trick I've learned from racers is to keep the boat on course, let the sails out, do the reefing, and then bring the sails back in. And here the person steering has an easy job of it. His job is very simple, keep it going in a straight line, and in fact...
I find new people under an anxiety attack have a hard time doing that sometimes.
Would you rather have them driving or have them up doing the reefing?
If they were going to knock me in the water, I think I'd have them reefing and say, no, I'm kidding.
Yeah,
but no, that's why I think it's important to emphasize that before you leave the dock, if you're taking new or inexperienced people out, you should teach them how to operate your radio, how to operate the engine, for an emergency and all that. And when you're leaving the harbor even, teach them how to steer the boat, what makes it go which way, whether you have a tiller or a helm, or, what makes that boat turn and how the stern will move, out. That's different than a car and all. And I think that would lessen a lot of accidents out there. I don't know if you'd agree with that.
I agree. In fact, I make it a point to put the least experienced person, give him the helm long before we have to get into a heavy weather situation, and then stand by the person, coax him into it, because you, as the boat operator or owner, you're the person who knows what's going on. Impart that knowledge to the person at the helm, and now he feels like, hey, I'm part of this trip. I'm real important. I've got the helm, and he's taught me in the last 5 or 10 minutes how to handle it and guided me through it, even though, yes, there's a lot of wind and big seas. And now this frees you up to go do the reefing, do headsail changes or whatever that requires really detailed knowledge of your boat. You can't send somebody forward on a boat who has had no experience at all on a boat.
I know, that was a
keep
joke.
Keep them at the back, and you can really make use of them very well, and they feel as they're a valuable part of the trip, and again, it frees you up to do the heavy-duty work.
Like most people on boats, or men perhaps that own a boat, I've taken some ladies out that really don't want to touch anything, are afraid to move, for the first few hours or days. And I really, really work hard to make them, become accustomed to the boat and what's happening, because that's a safety factor for myself. That if they know how to steer at least, I can run around and do things in an emergency. Also, I find if they're seasick, and I give them a responsibility, something such as steering, and have them steering to the compass, it occupies their mind, and it seems to drain the seasickness out of them. They're too scared sometimes to be seasick, or too concentrating too hard. But if they have nothing to do except watch the waves or something, they can become seasick.
Yeah. But I get a lot of trips where women come on the trips and they're sailing. They want to sail not with their sailing partner or their husband. They want to sail alone. They want to get instruction from somebody who is not their beloved, let's say. And if they make a mistake, or if a mistake is made, it's not going to interfere with their relationship. Mm-hmm. And all of us expect the most of our mates, and if they let us down some way, that's sometimes difficult to deal with. But when women come out on one of the cruises, and I get a lot of women that come out on these cruises, they jump into doing foredeck work, the reefing. They want to do it finally, because often they have been protected, they've been put down in the galley, let's say, or relegated to steering in sort of innocuous situations. They've never had the helm when it's really heavy weather, or they've never been doing the reefing. So if, in terms of safety, how are they going to get the boat back if they can't do this. You know, if the man is hurt or
Well,
incapacitated.
it's like the Skipper Saver course in the U.S. Power Squadron. That's intended for the mate, whether the woman owns the boat and the husband takes it, or vice versa, to give them a general education about that boat and the equipment on it, and it does what it says it does. Skipper Saver course.
And you know what the ultimate test of that is? To let the woman take the boat out with her friends, not with him. He shouldn't be aboard. He shouldn't be down below, because she knows she can always call on him, and it's wonderful to let him go out, you know, some afternoon and you know, as a good starter, a tremendous confidence builder.
They have
Absolutely.
the radio, they know how to use it, all that, but I'm sure they're more relaxed. And on that note, I know we have to go to a short break, and we'll be right back. Want to go sailing? Hey, let's freak them out, untie us.
Sailing to a blue horizon where the ocean meets the sky. Looking to a new tomorrow, a life for you and I. Let our imagination set the course along the way. We'll reach our destination along the road from yesterday. Oh, sail away with me. Forever with you is where I want to be.
We're back with Mike Peisel, sailor and educator. I understand you have some heavy weather sailing photographs to show us. Could you show us those, Mike?
Okay, since we can't take the boat out here, this is a rented boat this week, so since we can't take the boat out, I thought I'd bring some shots of heavy weather sailing. And again, this is Santa Barbara Channel at one of her finest. One of our first heavy weather sailing trips we went on came out about like this. It was a really wonderful trip, and it shows the kind of stuff we take people out in.
Well, it looks like the cameraman was pretty steady. For as wild as that looks, you know.
And he was also using a Nikonos camera, just so it would stay dry and keep in one piece. Another time, the first time I was ever caught in heavy weather myself, realizing that no, it was never going to happen to me. We all think of that, you know, think of it that way. It's the kind of thing that always happens to somebody else, you think. And finally, you get caught in it. And on this particular trip, this was the first time I had ever seen weather like this, and happened to have a camera and shot some of these photographs.
What were the seas and winds that day, do you remember?
This was a famous storm, a March northwest gale, and the wind was a force 8 gusting into force 9, which is sort of 50 knots. The seas looked to be about 20 feet. Even a 12-foot sea looks like about 20
like
feet.
Like Memorial Day, we had 25-foot seas and gale winds, 45, 50 knot.
Okay. And this one, here's another good heavy weather shot of a boat running downwind, probably 18-foot seas. The boat had been riding as much as 16 knots during this particular run, downwind. Glorious sailing.
I'm usually cooking at 5 knots. So
We're all
16
cooking at
is
5
quite
knots.
fast.
And that's it for our heavy weather sailing shots.
What's the, I'd hate to miss this other nice
Okay,
shot.
the other one here, this is one of my favorite photographs that I took out at the islands one time. This is what happens when you don't anchor correctly. About a year before this photograph was taken, this beautiful boat, about a 40-foot double-ender old-time boat, was out at one of the anchorages. And they spent the night there, a nice calm night, but the next morning the wind started coming into the anchorage and bringing some waves in with it. So it got very uncomfortable, and they cranked up the anchor and
Parked on shore.
and fired up the engine and tried to drive out of the harbor. And one of these little buoy lines that is tied to the anchor got wrapped around the propeller of the boat.
Were they dragging the
Uh,
anchor?
they were, the anchor was
it
aboard the
dragging?
boat, but they had a little buoy line
yeah.
just trailing aft from the anchor. And this wrapped around the propeller and seized the engine, stopped the engine. And now these winds and waves were carrying them towards shore. So what would you do in this situation? What's the emergency brake?
Right.
You drop the anchor. Well, their anchor was tied up to their boat, and it wouldn't reach the bottom. And by the time they figured this whole thing out, and it was just a matter of minutes, this boat drifted up onto the beach and became
a monument to
became a
children
wreck.
and birds, right?
Yeah.
You know, not too long ago, about a month or two, we had a large, perhaps 40-foot sailboat come up on the beach right here in Ventura, where he's coming in the harbor on a demo ride, selling his boat, and had the prospective buyers right on the boat. And the poor guy got a line caught in his prop. You know, I can't emphasize to people how often this happens. Also recently, just to briefly enlighten the people, a classic example is a young man that found a lady that wanted to go sailing, had never been sailing, did not show her how to use the radio, the engine, or anything. Took her out in the ocean, and he got a line caught in his propeller. So he hopped overboard to free it. She sailed away without him. He drowned. Took her about 17, 18 hours to figure out how to get help. And so this is an important thing, to check your boat for lines at all times, and also while you're sailing. Something can bounce around and come off. Make sure everything's secure. A little safety tip I had to get in there.
A good safety tip, and here's another good safety tip. Before you start up the engine, always, you know, before you put it in gear anyway, just check around the back of the boat and make sure that one little line hasn't dragged over the side.
I checked the whole boat, because up on the bow you could have a jib sheet, you know, hanging down or something.
Yeah.
And also, I've noticed, this will get you too. You might not have lines over, but I've had my engine seized going into Santa Barbara. People throw plastic bags out in the water.
Okay.
And they're mixed in with seaweed and, you know, different little doodads out there. And when you wind the plastic bag around your prop, it's going to stop. And fortunately, I was going right in the dock, and everything worked out fine.
Well, dealing with minor emergencies like that is one of the things that we really focus on. Suppose, like that boat that's sailing in Ventura Harbor, if they were used to sailing that boat in and out of the harbor, or knew what to expect from their boat under sail, they had practiced this. They could have gotten the sails up perhaps and gotten out of it. One of the things we focus on is what do you do when you have no engine? Heavy weather, you have no engine, you can't use it there anyway. How about anchoring? We cover anchoring under sail after your engine has quit, assuming people are chartering a boat somewhere and they don't maintain the engines well. Or if you're anchored and you can't get the engine started up, how do you get out of the anchor?
Yeah, you have to work it out in advance. Like I wish we'd go over all the safety drills that we have, like man overboard, that you should do in advance to know what you're going to throw over and what you're going to do when and how. But we have less than 2 minutes left, so I was hoping you could tell people how they get in touch with men of your sort, you know, or yourself, but also other private instructors. The boating industry seems to be a word-of-mouth place. We don't see them advertised on TV or radio. I think it's flyers and word of mouth, but if you could tell me.
Yeah, probably one of the better sources of information of all of the sailing schools in the U.S. would be the American Sailing Association.
And they have a list of the instructors?
Marina del Rey. They're centered in Marina del Rey, and they have schools all over the U.S.
Okay.
And they would know what level of sailing these schools can
And on
teach.
that note, I'm going to have to go.
Okay.
I do appreciate it, Mike. And
Glad to
thank
be
you
here.
for coming. Watch Captain's Log. Learn something. It may save your life. I hope so.